Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. I'm pleased to say that today we have a very interesting guest on our show, and his name is John Thibault. He's the founder and CEO of iLobby and the author of the #1 international bestseller called How to Change a Law. His company and his new book are focused on empowering voters so that they can change laws, basically improve their communities, influence their country, and impact the world. You know, I want to welcome John Thibault to the show. John, it's so interesting to have you on the show because, you know, right now you're trending. And when I say you're trending, what I mean is that books that are about politics and politics in general are a very popular subject. Now, you've had a very illustrious career. So let's start off by telling our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to reference the part that brought me into the policy arena, and that really was in the early 90s for a little over a 3-year period. I was working at MCA Universal in government affairs. And during that time, I actually got exposed to what happens at the highest levels in terms of Hollywood and Washington and dealing with politicians. And then if I fast forward, I was on the early founding team of eBay and then Financial Engines. And then to short-circuit it a little bit, coming back into 08 and 09, I had a lot of friends who were frustrated by politics and policy and the elections and really felt they couldn't get anything done. And what I felt was that didn't reflect my experience when I was working in government affairs. And I realized that what I learned there was something that most people don't know. And that's what prompted me to write the book.
Yeah. Now, you've served on a lot of committees also talking about things like the tax ballot and several measures and strategic campaigns and things of that nature. Now, why did you start doing that before you actually started to get involved in real politics?
Yeah, you know, sometimes these happen as personal stories, but it turned out that we had a dog, and the breeder of the dog happened to also be the same breeder who was the breeder and the owner for another dog that a woman was running to get on local council here in our town. And she had hired a political consultant to get elected, and that didn't work. And she was a very nice person. I met with her and said, we have the same dog. Maybe I could just give you some marketing thoughts about what to do, because I had a background in marketing as well from eBay and other companies. And in the course of that, she ended up getting on council. She won the election and then became mayor eventually, and referred me to other members of the council, and I helped them with their elections, and they actually all won, which was sort of fun for me because it was a pro bono effort on my part.
Yeah.
And then they said, well, you know, you got us into office, maybe you could help with this parcel tax measure. So sometimes these things are accidental, and you get roped into them, and then it works out okay. Yeah. So I did that as well. Okay,
let's get into your book now. Do you have the book in front of you by any chance?
Yes, I do. All
right, so open it up to a section or a little part of it that you think you want our audience to hear. So if it's in the introduction or something of that nature, I'd like to let our audience get a taste of what your book sounds like.
Sure. I'm going to use the introduction, so I'll just jump in and pull a paragraph here. The iLobby policy framework has 3 components: message, mass, and money. And the purpose of the book is to give you some insight, actionable tools, and strategies that you can implement on day one. So I want to help you move from being a frustrated voter who is disgusted with the system to a more engaged citizen who realizes that your participation in public policy truly matters.
This is the start of what I think is going to be a great conversation between you and I. So before we really move on, I want our audience to know what iLobby is.
iLobby is a platform on the web which is, I refer to it as a crowd-funded lobbying. And you can really do, 2 or 3 simple things. One is craft your message through an online open debate with other constituents or anybody who happens to be on or has an issue. Come together in an aligned manner where you understand what you want to get done, and you can vote on issues. And then if people are serious, they can put their money where their mouth is and start funding, like you would with Kickstarter, put money into the pot to use that to hire a public affairs firm or a lobbying firm. So we're basically trying to make it a simple way for voters to connect with politicians through lobbyists.
I see. Now, we're having a very, very controversial election right now. People are stumped. That's the word I would use, stumped. They don't know. Some people think that Trump, for example, is just absolutely horrible, and other people think Hillary is horrible. And the thing that you hear on the street, and that's the best way to know what people are thinking when you hear it on the street, is that people are saying they're going to vote for, the lesser of the 2 evils. Now, when you hear something like that, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I absolutely agree with you, Susan. I mean, people are saying that, and it's almost like, well, all politicians are bad, so I'll pick the one who is less bad in the hopes that will be a better choice. It's interesting. I make a distinction between politics and policy. And politics is really focused on the candidates and the leaders that you want to be in those positions, whether it's in Congress or for the president. And one of the things I have in the book refers to the 5 common mistakes. And my number 4 one is that we choose celebrity candidates and we do not focus on issues. So I have been asked, and I was asked earlier in the year, do you support, this is when there were still 4 people in there, Cruz and Bernie Sanders. And I was asked, well, who are you going to vote for, And I know the media is really pushing this, and they have been for the last 6 months or a year even. And I would ask them, I said, are you a delegate to the convention? They would say no. And I'd say, well, if you're not a delegate, all this angst you have really doesn't matter because it's only the delegates who are going to make the final decision. And the same thing is true in an indirect kind of way with the presidential election. Although it has the highest visibility, and that's what people focus on, if you're not an elector, which, there are very, very, very few who are, your vote is only going into the popular vote count, and therefore, you really should be focused on who your member of Congress is, who your county supervisor or your assemblyman or your senators, some of these other seats.
John, you've been discussing how influential the legislation is and senatorial candidates and of course, the president is and vice president. But you know what? You just mentioned the word delegates. Before we get on to how this all kind of occurs, how the process of making somebody become the president, I want people to understand what is a delegate and how do you become one?
Yeah, well, the delegates, becoming a delegate, I don't know the precise rules, but they're defined by the parties. So there are people who are big donors to a specific party, and as a part for their loyal, voting and their loyal record, they get offered that. And the candidates look at that and say, okay, well, we're going to select this delegate or that delegate. An example is Peter Thiel, who's a VC and runs a hedge fund. He's pretty well known. He's written a few books. He was a delegate to the Republican convention. But my understanding is you pay tens of thousands of dollars and kind of work your way up. As far as the electors, which is different because that's the Electoral College, and that'll be coming up, after the election. The electors, I believe, and that, again, it's very complicated, so I'm giving a very high-level overview, but they are voted or appointed by a representative, and the electors consist of the same number of members of Congress and the District of Columbia, so there's a total of 538. And that's when people say the Electoral College vote count after the election, you need 270. That would be the winning number, and that's what people are pushing for with the president.
Yeah.
They're appointed by usually folks who are already in office. So, for instance, if my congressperson says, this person's been really loyal, they're a really good business person, or they're a teacher, or they're someone in the community, I am going to appoint them to be an elector, and if there is no conflicts or anything else, they would become an elector, and then vote for the president, and I believe the results are announced in early December.
Right. How is that fair? I mean, we talk, say Hillary Clinton, she talks about the middle class. She says, I want to help the middle class. I want to kind of give them a tax break. I want to tax the rich because, who has the money? But the thing is that when I listen to you tell how this all happens and the people who become the electorates and the delegates, they have to be rich? I mean, how is that a democracy?
Yeah, well, that's a, I think this goes back to the entire founding of how elections were set up by the founders. So we have a representative democracy, or a representative republic rather, and we have a popular vote for the president, but we as citizens do not directly elect the president. It is the Electoral College. And the biggest example where we saw this, I guess, dispute, if you want, was in Bush v. Gore in 2000, where Bush won the electoral count vote, yet Gore won the popular vote. And once people woke up and realized that, oh my God, Bush won, what happened? More people became aware that there is these arcane and rather complex rules regarding how the Electoral College determines the presidency.
Yeah. So you're talking about what happened so many years ago, and now it's a different. I was about to say a different planet. I mean, we're living through tough times, and the whole. I guess the whole education system has cut out civics. So kids don't know about politics. They don't understand. And in fact, I've kind of spoken to quite a few people, adults, and they say, what does that mean? What does that mean? They just vote from their emotions and their heart. They don't vote from their head. Now, when you hear that, don't you feel disgusted?
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that, and I think that applies to most members of the population and to anyone who's not involved in it. And, we hear politicians say, we would like you to be involved. One thing I think is critical to understand is if we just get beyond the presidency or the presidential election, or even the congressional, when somebody gets elected, the next big thing they have to do is they deal with policy and issues. And we keep hearing from not just the press, but the pundits and everyone saying, we want the candidates to talk about the issues. And what I am saying is, I think average people like you and me and the listeners, anybody can get involved in specific issues. And you might say, well, I'm not dealing with, foreign relations or, energy policy or these things because they're so big and complex. But if we think about it on a local level, you could do something as simple as saying, I want to have speed bumps on my street to slow the cars down so the kids will be safe. And you do it at the local level. And what I'm saying is, when you understand how that works at the policy level, the same rules begin to apply at the county, state, and federal level. But you can begin to get a toe in the water by doing it in a very simple way. And I think the key is really understanding issues that we care about, whether it is education, healthcare, the environment, energy. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So.
Yeah. Now, when you got started with this lobby organization, did you really feel that there was a lot of things that you could do and that would make a difference? And if so, what did you do that was really, truly a success?
Yeah, so iLobby is a platform that empowers individuals to be able to come together around a single issue and move it forward. And it's still relatively new. So in the book, I have a couple of examples of, folks who made changes at a local level using some of the principles I talked about. I won't go into them. They're actually in the success examples in the book. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to allude to one where it was a much longer haul and people would be more familiar with it, and that would be something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right, where Candy Lightner wanted to, help her child who had been killed by a drunk driver, and it took her a long, long time. This was in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. It took her a long, long time using conventional methods to convince lawmakers they had to lower the blood alcohol content from, at different states had different numbers, but 1.2 roughly down to 0.08, and get drunk drivers off the road. And what's interesting is that if you think about it, she was very clear on her message. She knew what she wanted to get done. She had to pull together a mass of people, which was my second point. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately she had to have the resources, energy, or capital to continue the fight, meaning the money to make that work. Right. And over time she convinced enough lawmakers to do it, but not all the states adopted it. And it was only after the federal, national, I believe, Highway Traffic Safety Fund said, we are not going to give states certain funding unless they adopt the 0.08. And that really got the states on board, and they said, okay, we'll go along with you. The reason I mention this is because this framework is really the same thing that we did when I was at MCA. You pull together a group of people, get very clear and specific on your message, understand who the opposition is, what you want to get done, and make sure that you have enough aligned interests and, again, the sort of financial support to keep going. Mm-hmm. And this is what I'm saying is this is what lobbyists and major corporations and trade associations are doing every day. And people seem opposed to it, but that's really how it works.
Right. Now, can citizens come together to debate any issue, anywhere, anytime? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, there's two things they can do. You can start an issue that you think is important in your community, or if you want, you can mirror current legislation. So in California, there's ballot measures that are coming up. One of the more notable ones is related to the decriminalization or legalization of medical marijuana. So that'll be on the ballot, and people can vote on that. If you think of iLobby as a platform where you could have almost a non-binding citizen referendum, I don't want to make it sound boring because I think it's actually an interesting way to do it.
Oh, yeah.
So instead of looking at it when you go into the voting booth, you read the thing, you don't understand the language because it's so complicated anyway.
Sure.
If you had the opportunity 6 or 9 months ahead of time to vote with your neighbors, to raise an issue or include some of the verbiage that's in a ballot measure and really build support one way or the other, I'm not taking sides on this, mm-hmm. one way or the other, then you're giving people the opportunity to have a more informed say. And you can do it in a very simple way. They just, come in, either start a debate or they can just vote on somebody else's debate.
Yeah. Now, a lot of the different candidates for president, senator, congressman, they have these debates in different communities. That I remember when Giuliani, for example, he used to go to all these different places, and the communities would all kind of gather, and he would tell everybody what he was trying to do. Do you like that? Do you like that kind of approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, again, I have a short blurb in the book about the different things that people do, everything from petitions to writing your congressman to attending a town hall. And what you're referring to, Susan, is having a town hall.
Correct.
We have that here. So I'm in California 18, which is Congresswoman Anna Ishue's district in Silicon Valley. And she has town halls that they announce ahead of time. And, people can come in, and usually think about this. There's 700,000 people in the district, and that's the same for all of us across the country. Mm-hmm. And I would say maybe 100 people show up, 100, maybe 150 if we're really lucky, and probably 2 or 3 or 5 people might speak. So think about that in terms of the actual number against the total number of constituents, 700,000. So it's a very, very, very small amount. I mean, it's less than 1%. The town hall is good because It puts the issues out that the policy or lawmaker wants the public to know about. She or he tells their position on the particular issues, and they indicate their support or how they're going to vote. And then it gives people the opportunity to respond. The only thing I have to say about it, though, is that when you get up to speak, you're given 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
They say, who are you, where do you live, what's your address, thank you so much. You give your comments. And then those just become part of the public dialogue. But you're not debating with other people, and you're not doing any coalition building. In other words, when you leave that town hall, you have not made 50 friends, and you do not have the ability to move forward and know who else is there, or can you build a coalition to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the weaknesses of it. I like that it's transparent. I like that it's open. I think it's great to have that collaborative communication. But you need to have follow-up. You need to build a relationship with the lawmaker.
Yeah, but very often people get very frustrated because when they go to their lawmakers, they probably, they say, would you help me with this? Would you help me with that? And the lawmaker, well, what do? They go to somebody who's going to get them reelected. They don't really want to help all the people. Now, I'm sounding biased. I mean, because I've had that experience even in my field. You try to convince a different candidate that it's really important for them to do something for the environment, as an example, or some of the things that you said before. But our politicians, the whole point is that all they want to do is get elected. So they have to keep on raising money, and get people on their side. So are they really representing us to the fullest? Are they an advantage for us, or I mean, and I want to use the word disadvantage, because do they really believe that they can help us?
Well, I think that they are, this might sound different compared to what other people think, but I think they're generally ethical, serious, and responsible people who want to do good things. The reality is, and I've heard and read this, that they spend almost 50% of their time raising money. Mm-hmm. So let's use Congress as an example because it's the most obvious. They're in for 2 years. They have to raise money. A congressional seat is it's about $1.2 million on last count in terms of what you need to raise. And if they spend 50% of their time doing that, they're really just trying to raise money to convince more people to buy media so that they can get reelected. And they try to do what they can, but they're operating with, again, a really generally pretty small staff, mm-hmm. 4 or 5 or 6 people in the office and a few people in the district. So they don't have an incredible bandwidth. So what they try to do is deal with, obviously, large companies or employers in the district who they think have thousands of employees who could be voters and will go along and or become donors. But, you're absolutely right. You can write to your congressman or you can meet them and talk to them, and ultimately you're going to get a letter back at some point saying, hey, do you want to contribute $10 or $25 or $50? And the numbers go up, obviously, and then there's fundraisers. And before you know it, you're hitting your limits.
Yeah. What about PACs? Do you think PACs are good?
Yeah, PACs are a little bit different, and I don't talk about them that much, although when I was at MCA, we also had a PAC, and I won't go, they're sort of, much more complicated, so I won't go into it in depth, but mm-hmm. It's basically a legal structure that allows a company or a group to solicit certain qualified employees to put money in, and then the directors of the PAC, the Political Action Committee, they in turn decide how they're going to allocate those funds. And that's really, again, on the politics side, where they're focused on giving money to candidates. And I'm sitting on the issue side, which is really about ideas.
Yeah. Now, you remember, and forgive me, I don't remember her first name, but her last name was Brockman. She worked on that situation where the water was tainted with all kinds of horrible things, and it took her years to get her message out, to try to make a change in her community, which I believe was in Texas. Now, that could be not only frustrating, it it could be a life endangering thing because she felt that she was going to be killed. So what about that? Here you're pushing, and I understand, totally understand that, everybody in this country should understand some of the legal jargon and all about politics. But when somebody gets involved who's just on a low level and she tries so hard, how do you speak to that situation? Because how many people would do what she did?
I think it takes a lot of courage to take on an entrenched opposition and to pick something where you don't have a lot of supporters yet. And I think when I say the real world, I'm referring to sort of pre-internet. And for somebody to do that, you're absolutely right. They have to be amazingly convinced about what they want to get done. They have to understand who the opposition is, and they have to plow through that. What I'm saying is that if you do it on this platform, or if you do it on any platform where it's internet related, you can take very simple little baby steps. So in a case like that, and again, I'm not familiar with that specific one, although I'm aware of some other tainted water cases and like Detroit or Michigan, where there was something recently, 6 months ago with the lead in the water.
Sure.
What you're trying to do, it's really simple. You're trying to influence the politician. And so you need to understand who opposes you and who supports you. And if you end up with massive opposition where you feel like, your life is being threatened or you're not getting something done, obviously that's very bad. But I think that if we have transparency and more people come to the table and support you from all over the country, things will change. The one thing I think that's critical here, which we kind of keep this, under the radar or in the background so that people don't get conflicted by it. And I'll try to use a simple example. My congressperson sits on the subcommittee for commerce. And if I had an issue regarding agriculture, I don't know who the chairman of the Agriculture Committee is, but let's say he sits in Arkansas. I actually can't go to him to say, hey, listen, I have this issue regarding agriculture. I want to get something done. He would say, hey, no, you have to talk to Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. She's your representative. So I'm in this sort of vertical silo where I can't cross the line because of my political district.
Right.
But the reality is the power that would change the issue regarding the agriculture, whatever it happens to be, is in Arkansas. So what I need to do is I need to contact my friend, my college roommate, my friend's brother, whomever, who lives in Arkansas, who happens to be his constituent. And it's that subtlety where with data, with the internet, with, doing things in machine learning, you can actually connect the right people. So if I say, look, I want to get this thing done in agriculture. Does anybody else know about it? I would have that in my profile. Just like, think of it like Amazon, where you pick a book and you find other readers who like the same author that you do, or they like the same genre that you do, and they're in other states. And all of a sudden you can begin to form these ad hoc coalitions. You can't do that in the real world. It just doesn't work as simply as that.
So, John, if you had your choice of fighting a particular policy or a situation that you think is really bad, which one would it be? I'm just curious. Would it be something that deals with the environment or something that deals with business? What subject really interests you that you think there needs to be a change?
Well, there are really so many, and I'm not trying to dodge it, but I'm interested in lots of things. I'm interested, one thing that concerns me is the $20 trillion in debt, for instance, that the country has now, In the last 8 years, we've jumped from 10 to 20. Does that mean in the next 10 years we're going to go to 40 and we're going to become a complete debtor nation? And what's interesting is that it seems, abstract because it's a financial thing. But in reality, if we don't have a budget and a way for the country to be solvent and move forward and not pass debt on to our kids, we're not going to be able to pay for all these other programs that we want. So a lot of folks say, hey, look, I want to do something with education, or I want to clean up the environment, I want to do that. What we are doing is we're making, effectively through taxes, we're making transfer payments from us individuals and businesses to the government. They end up with a $3.8 trillion budget, which is about what they collect. And then that is used for lots of different programs, whether it's Medicare, Social Security, Veterans Affairs, foreign relations, clean coal, new kinds of energy, all these things. Mm-hmm. And the lawmakers make those allocation decisions about what they want to do, and obviously they overspend every year, which is why we have an increasing deficit year after year.
Right.
So I think that one of the big questions that I see is from the financial standpoint in terms of tax reform and then regulatory reform to sort of ease the burdens on small business so we can get the country moving again. I think that's really important.
Right.
And then you'll have free spending money to be able to implement lots of other programs.
How do you compare our nation, the U.S., to, say, Europe or to various other nations around the world? They have different systems, a parliamentary system, various others. So do you think that our system is better than theirs, or should we think about the possibility of kind of compromising and making ours a little bit more like theirs?
Well, one of the things I really like about the United States is we have lots of things that are good that we've kind of ignored. And it's everything from, free enterprise to, patent protection and property rights and free speech and innovation, etc. Again, I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I hear over and over again that other countries and areas try to emulate what we're doing here. But as a sort of hotbed of innovation, you end up with people who are developing things that we never would have thought of before. And I think that in order for a country and or the world to grow, we need to be, original, creative, produce, and the country and the government has to support that. So when countries and governments around the world do that, I think the countries prosper. When countries say, hey, it's a zero-sum game and we're going to confiscate what you have, and you hear this a lot in sort of more social-leaning countries, where they're saying, oh, well, the rich have all this money, let's take it from them. That doesn't actually increase the overall GDP or value of the country. The worst cases, of course, I hate even to think about this, is what happened to Venezuela.
Yes.
Where, it's horrific what's going on there because they were a single resource nation. Mm-hmm. They were a socialist country. The government took control of everything. They took what were private assets and confiscated them.
Yes.
And now you don't have food on the shelves. Now you have gangs roaming the streets. Now you have hospitals that don't have supplies and people can't get medical care. It's just horrible. Mm-hmm. So in that continuum of complete freedom to having complete government control, there has to be a balance about what makes sense for a country and the people to prosper.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the balance. But before I do that, I heard you mention the technology. Technology has changed politics and it's changed a lot of things over, the last 25 years. Technology, or does technology make a difference in how our country is run? And do you think it's a positive thing, or do you think it's a negative thing?
Well, I think I'm a little bit of a technophobe, or technophile, rather.
Okay.
And I actually like it. And I think there's a couple things that have happened. We ended up with the development of the microprocessor and the development of these companies like Intel very early on, and Hewlett-Packard and others. But what's happened is we have so much information. We are digitizing these assets. We are delivering them to and from each other in a quicker, faster way, and which, is increasing the amount of information that we have. I keep hearing that information is doubling every year and a half to 2 years. And again, in order to handle that, you have Moore's Law, where the microprocessor, the power of it is getting smaller, less expensive, yet is capable of handling, double or triple the amount of information processing going forward. And I think this sort of dislocation that we're seeing among lots of people are, something that could have been done let me go back in a different way.
Sure.
At the turn of the century, the last century, 1900, something like 95% of the American population was involved in agriculture. And if you ask me now what it is, I think it's down to 2 or 3%.
Right.
And I was stunned to learn that, they have satellites that can detect what the crops are, when they need to be watered, understand if they're, ready to be harvested, and then they send signals directly to machines or robot harvesters that go and do the work. So now you have a machine doing the work of maybe 1,000 farmers or pickers, cotton pickers or whatever from over 100, 110 years ago. So the question is, what's the highest aspiration of human intelligence? Is it to do manual labor for the rest of your life until you die, and then, the lifespan back in the late 1800s was, 40, 45 years old, or is it to really aspire to be greater and do new and novel things? And I think it's the latter. And the dislocation we're seeing the same thing with autonomous cars, Should we have people driving cars, or can autonomous vehicles take over that? Right. And it's just interesting. It doesn't happen in one day, but it happens over a period of 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I just heard the other day that in California, they're getting ready to completely legalize autonomous cars without a human driver inside the vehicle. Right. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. The only thing that I kind of think about is, well, let's use Trump, for example, again. He's tweeting all kinds of messages out. I mean, that's a person who's running for the president of the United States. He tweets all kinds of things. I mean, all these different platforms and social media. Do you think that they're good? I mean, because what a horrible thing. From my standpoint, I'm giving you my bias. I think that social media is necessary now for people like me, but on the other hand, I think that people are getting wrong messages. So, what's your opinion about that?
Well, I agree that we're overwhelmed by information, and you have to be selective. So there's an interesting fine line between just information, data, and wisdom. If it doesn't have meaning, and you're not learning, and we're not, gathering the meaningfulness or wisdom that can come from information, then it's very disheartening. You end up feeling like you're lost in a sea of, complex information that's coming at you from all angles, and you don't know who to believe, what to believe, and you never let your brain have a moment of relief. And so from that standpoint, no, it's probably not great. But I think we're going through these experiments, and sometimes, companies move forward, they push something, and then later it turns out that it doesn't work. I mean, probably a couple hundred years ago when they had pamphlets and those were circulating, people who were writing books or had traditional newspapers thought the pamphlets were a horrible thing. But that all changes, just like we have digital books now and other forms of information. So I think, we do have this acceleration of information. How people use it, it's really up to them. But I think it's okay to do that versus saying, well, we're going to control it and nobody can see what's going on. Again, I think of some of the repressive countries, China or Iran,
sure,
where if you say the wrong thing, you're imprisoned, You don't have the right to speak up.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, I think, the United States is running a very unique experiment. It has never been tried before, and it's, we are like a teenager learning how to operate industry, the government, and society, but it's still a pretty young country. We're only 200 and some years old.
Yeah. John, I always like to ask my guests to give the last word. You've been telling our audience so much, but there must be something that you left out or I left out asking you. So would you give my audience the last word on this whole subject of lobbying and tell them a little bit more about how they get your book and the name of the book and various other things?
Sure. So the company is iLobby.co. If you go to the website, you can sign up and get on the email list, and that's the best way to stay in touch, and then we'll provide you with more information from there. We're developing courses and other things. The name of the book is How to Change a Law, and it's available on Amazon. And it's available in Audible, paperback, and or Kindle. If I had to leave you with a takeaway, the couple that I think of, there's one or two that just come to mind, but it's sort of like, if you can't beat them, join them. But I don't want that to be a, like, oh, well, that sounds, silly. But there is this idea of reciprocal altruism where I scratch your back, you scratch mine, I help you get something done. But I think the real empowerment message comes from the fact, and, I've been told that this is actually hopeful. People I've talked to said, wow, this sounds optimistic and hopeful. I could actually get something done, and I believe you can. So I use the example that if you had 30,000 people who came together and said, look, instead of going to a movie this week, I would put $20 in on a specific issue, you would have raised $600,000, and you would then have the same ability to hire any lobbyist in Washington you want tomorrow to get something done. And that's at the federal level. But it really speaks to the fact that it doesn't take a lot of money on an individual basis if enough people come together. And so the platform is designed to make that really simple so people can do that.
John Thibault is the founder and CEO of iLobby and the author of the International Bestseller, How to Change the Law. He's been our guest on the show today, and boy, did we learn a lot from him. So I want to thank you, John, for being a guest on the Susan Brender Show. It's really been a delight.
No, I really appreciate it. I'm happy to, help out and sort of explain this. I think, the American people need to know.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.